At 3:47 on the morning of November 12, 1942, Virginia Hall sat in a Lyon apartment watching a Gestapo checkpoint through binoculars she had borrowed from a resistance fighter who would be dead within the week. 36 years old, former American diplomat, one wooden leg. The Germans had 32,000 troops occupying Lyon, and in the past 6 months, they had arrested 847 members of the French resistance. Hall's code name was Artemis. The Gestapo called her the Limping Lady. They wanted her more than any other Allied agent in France. Klaus Barbie, the butcher of Lyon, had her photograph on his desk. When subordinates asked why he hadn't caught her yet, Barbie explained that Hall was more valuable as a target than a prisoner. Every agent they captured while hunting her revealed information about resistance networks. Hall knew this. She also knew that her wooden leg, the prosthetic she called Cuthbert, was the only reason she was still alive. The leg weighed 8 pounds. Made of wood and metal, primitive by modern standards, painful to wear for extended periods. Hall had lost her left leg below the knee in a hunting accident in Turkey in 1933. She was 27 years old at the time, working for the State Department, aiming for a career in the Foreign Service. The accident ended those plans. State Department regulations prohibited anyone with an amputation from serving as a diplomat. Hall refused to accept it. She spent 6 years trying to change the policy, writing letters, filing appeals, speaking to anyone who would listen. The State Department never changed its mind. In 1939, Hall resigned and moved to Paris. When the war started, she joined the French ambulance service. When France fell in 1940, she escaped to London. British Special Operations Executive recruited her in March of 1941. SOE was Churchill's Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare, created to coordinate sabotage and subversion in occupied Europe. They needed agents who could operate independently, who spoke native-level French, who could recruit and organize resistance networks without support. Hall qualified on every count except one: the prosthetic leg. SOE doctors examined her and declared her unfit for field operations. Too slow, too conspicuous, too vulnerable. Hall demonstrated otherwise. She walked 3 miles in under an hour. She climbed stairs without assistance. She convinced the medical board that her disability was not a liability. SOE accepted her, but with restrictions. No parachute drops. No operations requiring extended foot marches. Hall would insert into France by conventional means and operate in urban areas where transportation was available. On August 23, 1941, Hall arrived in Vichy, France, posing as a New York Post correspondent. Her cover was solid. She actually filed newspaper stories. The Vichy government issued her a press credential. For 6 months, she operated openly, interviewing officials, attending social functions, building a network of contacts. Behind the cover, Hall was recruiting and organizing resistance cells across central France. She established safe houses, arranged supply drops, coordinated communication between groups that had never worked together. By early 1942, Hall's network included 47 active agents and over 200 auxiliary members. The Germans noticed. Abwehr intelligence reports from March 1942 referenced an American woman organizing terrorist activities in Lyon. The reports were vague. No name, no description beyond possibly disabled. The Gestapo began investigating. Hall adapted her tactics. She stopped filing newspaper stories. She changed departments every 2 weeks. She varied her route to meetings. She used the wooden leg as part of her operational security. Here's what she did. Hall would deliberately limp more pronounced when entering areas under German observation. Guards and informants would remember the woman with the obvious disability. Hours later, Hall would exit through a different route, walking normally. The wooden leg had an adjustable brace that allowed her to control how much she limped. With the brace loosened, she limped severely. With the brace tightened and her gait adjusted, the limp nearly disappeared. It sounds simple. It was brilliant. German intelligence was looking for a limping American woman. When Hall walked normally, witnesses did not connect her to the target description. She was hiding in plain sight by controlling the one physical characteristic the Germans knew about. The tactic worked until October of 1942. A resistance courier was arrested in Lyon with documents referencing Artemis. Under interrogation, the courier provided a description. American, mid-30s, brown hair, fluent French, wooden leg. The Gestapo now had confirmation. Klaus Barbie issued orders. Every checkpoint in Lyon was to stop and question any woman matching the description. Informants were offered cash rewards for information. Barbie personally briefed his officers. He told them the limping lady was the most dangerous Allied agent in France. Hall received warning on November 8th. A contact in the Lyon Police Department reported that the Gestapo had her description and were actively searching. Hall had 4 options. First, remain in Lyon and continue operations, accepting the increased risk. Second, relocate to another city and rebuild her network. Third, attempt escape to Spain and exfiltration to London. Fourth, go into hiding and wait for the situation to change. Hall chose option 3, not because she was afraid, but because her effectiveness in Lyon was compromised. The Gestapo knew too much. Remaining would risk not just her life but the entire network she had built. The problem was execution. The German occupation of Vichy France had begun on November 11th, one day earlier. Wehrmacht units were establishing checkpoints on every major road. The Spanish border was 200 miles south through mountainous terrain. Hall would have to cross the Pyrenees on foot in winter. With a wooden leg, Hall departed Lyon on November 13th. She traveled by train to Perpignan, then by bus to a village near the Spanish border. Her guide was a Basque smuggler named Anton. Anton had seen Hall's wooden leg and told her frankly that the crossing would be impossible. The route required climbing to 8,000 feet through snow. No woman with a prosthetic could make that journey. Hall explained that she had no alternative. Anton agreed to try but made no promises. They departed on November 15th at 2 a.m. The temperature was 28 degrees. Hall wore hiking boots, wool trousers, 3 layers of shirts, and a heavy coat. The wooden leg was wrapped in cloth to prevent noise. Hall carried a small pack with food, water, and papers identifying her as a French journalist. The first 6 miles were relatively flat. Hall managed well. At dawn, they reached the base of the mountains and began climbing. The terrain became steep. Hall used a walking stick for stability. The prosthetic leg had no ankle flexibility. Every step required her to compensate with her right leg and core strength. By 10 a.m., they had climbed 3,000 feet. Hall's stump was bleeding inside the prosthetic socket. The wooden leg was not designed for mountain climbing. The constant impact and pressure were causing tissue damage. Hall did not mention it to Anton. She kept climbing. At noon they stopped to rest. Anton examined Hall's gait and knew she was injured. He suggested they turn back. Hall refused. Anton explained that the worst terrain was ahead. Another 5,000 feet of elevation gain over 8 miles. Ice, snow, and sections requiring scrambling with hands and feet. Hall asked if Anton had ever guided someone across who wanted it more than she did. Anton said no. They continued. The afternoon was brutal. Hall fell twice on ice. The second fall damaged the wooden leg. A crack appeared in the ankle joint. The leg still functioned, but Hall could feel it flexing abnormally with each step. If the leg failed completely, she would be stranded. At 4 p.m., they reached a stone shelter at 7,200 feet. Anton intended to spend the night there. Hall disagreed. She could feel the wooden leg deteriorating. If they stopped, the cold might freeze the damaged joint. They needed to reach Spain before the leg failed. Anton argued. Hall overruled him. They continued in darkness. Hall used the walking stick in her right hand and held Anton's shoulder with her left. They climbed for 3 more hours. At 7:15 p.m., they crossed the border into Spain. The terrain descended. Hall knew she had made it, but the wooden leg had taken severe damage. The ankle joint was completely loose. Hall was essentially walking on a peg with no ankle articulation. They reached a Spanish village at 11 p.m. Hall collapsed in a barn. Anton left to arrange transportation to Barcelona. Hall removed the wooden leg and examined her stump. The skin was raw and bleeding. The prosthetic socket was stained with blood and lymphatic fluid. Hall cleaned the wounds with snow and wrapped her stump in cloth from her pack. The wooden leg was beyond field repair. The ankle joint needed professional servicing. Hall would have to reach Barcelona, find a prosthetist, and have the leg rebuilt, all while avoiding Spanish authorities who might detain her or return her to France. Hall reached Barcelona on November 18th. The British consulate provided her with new papers and medical care. A Spanish prosthetist repaired Cuthbert over 3 days. Hall insisted on watching the repair work. She needed to understand how the leg could be modified for future operations. Hall returned to London in January of 1943. Zoe debriefed her extensively. Her escape across the Pyrenees became legendary within the organization. Other agents considered it impossible. Hall had proved them wrong through determination and pain tolerance that most people could not comprehend. Zoe offered Hall a desk position. She refused. She wanted to return to France. Zoe explained that her face was too well known. The Gestapo had distributed her photograph to every checkpoint and police station in France. Returning would be suicide. Hall transferred to the American Office of Strategic Services, the OSS. The Americans had fewer restrictions. In March of 1944, Hall convinced OSS to send her back to France. Not to Lyon, to the countryside of central France where her face was less known. OSS inserted Hall by boat on March 21, 1944. She landed on the coast of Brittany and made her way inland. Her mission was to organize resistance groups in advance of the D-Day invasion. She would coordinate sabotage operations against German communications and transportation infrastructure. Hall posed as an elderly peasant woman. She dyed her hair gray, wore baggy clothing, and adopted a shuffling walk that disguised her limp. The wooden leg was hidden beneath long skirts. German soldiers saw an old French woman and ignored her. For 3 months, Hall moved through occupied France organizing sabotage teams. She coordinated attacks on railroad bridges, telephone lines, and German supply convoys. Her teams destroyed for bridges, cut telephone cables in 17 locations, and killed or captured over 150 German soldiers. The wooden leg created operational challenges. Hall could not move quickly. She could not run if discovered. She had to plan every movement carefully, ensuring she had escape routes that did not require speed or agility. Hall compensated by being smarter than her opponents. She studied German patrol patterns. She identified checkpoints and planned routes that avoided them. She recruited local guides who knew terrain that Germans considered impassable. She used her age disguise to pass through areas where younger women would be questioned. By June of 1944, Hall's network had grown to include over 1,500 active resistance fighters. When D-Day began on June 6, Hall's teams executed coordinated attacks across central France. They destroyed railroad tracks, ambushed German convoys, and harassed German units trying to reach Normandy. The Germans never caught her. Klaus Barbie continued searching for the limping lady in Lion, not knowing she was operating 200 miles away disguised as a grandmother who could barely walk. After the liberation of France in August of 1944, Hall remained in Europe conducting intelligence operations in Germany until the war ended. She was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, the only civilian woman to receive the award during World War II. The citation noted her extraordinary heroism and courage and determination. Hall retired from intelligence work in 1946. She married another former OSS officer and lived quietly in Maryland. She never spoke publicly about her wartime service. Friends and neighbors knew she had worked for the government during the war, but not the details. The wooden leg that had helped her escape the Gestapo and survive 2 years in occupied France was eventually donated to the CIA Museum. It sits in a secure facility in Virginia, viewed only by agency personnel. A placard describes it as the prosthetic leg worn by Virginia Hall during operations in occupied France. Most visitors do not understand the significance. They see a primitive wooden leg and assume it was a disability that made Hall's work harder. They do not understand that Hall turned her disability into an advantage. She used the leg to create a distinctive profile that she could manipulate. She accepted pain that would have broken most people. She crossed mountains that professional soldiers considered impassable. Virginia Hall died on July 8, 1982. She was 76 years old. Her obituary in the New York Times mentioned she had worked for the State Department and later for intelligence agencies during World War II. 3 paragraphs, no details, no mention of Lion or Klaus Barbie or the wooden leg that had kept her alive while she destroyed German operations across France. The CIA released partial details of Hall's service in 2005. Historians began researching her story. Books were written, articles published, documentaries produced. Virginia Hall finally received recognition decades after her death. But here is what matters. In November of 1942, when the Gestapo had her description and checkpoints were searching every woman in Lion, Virginia Hall escaped across mountains in winter on a damaged wooden leg because the alternative was capture and execution. She made a choice that most people would consider impossible and then executed it through willpower and pain tolerance that still seems incomprehensible. If this story moved you, hit that like button. It tells the algorithm to show this to more people who need to hear it. Subscribe if you haven't already. We're bringing forgotten stories back from the archives every day. Real people, real courage, real history that deserves to be remembered. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. United States, Canada, United Kingdom, Australia? Our community spans the globe. You're not just a viewer. You're part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching.